Bullshit.
Pretend for a moment we've entered a parallel universe, free of bullshit and full of bold solutions. That's what the No BS show's all about. I'm your host, Dave Mastovich. Our guest today is Ed Piskor, and it's going to be a crazy episode. But first, let's cut the bullshit. Summer, the weather, the laid-back mindset, vacation time. Ever wonder how much productivity suffers for companies during the summer? I've found that people use the "I'll be on vacation" line to explain why they can't get to something right before, during, and right after their actual vacation. But we marketers can be productive even at the beach. People reading under umbrellas, some with books, others with a Kindle or an e-reading device, kids building sandcastles, playing games, couples walking hand in hand along the beach. Some work on their tans, others are in the water. Think about it. It's market segmentation at its finest. We tend to fall nicely into some sort of consumer group, enabling creative people to drill down and craft targeted marketing messages tailored to reach and influence each group. Those photography guys and gals wandering up and down the beach, making eye contact and trying to talk to the moms, they already know women make most buying decisions. If they're struggling, the photo sales guys will try to use dad to get to the boss, mom. This tactic has modest success, but I admire their toolkit of sales tactics. The umbrella and chair salespeople, they take a more laid-back sales approach. They know you need them, and they simply show their products. The implication being, go ahead, be uncomfortable, get burnt. I'll be over here under one of my umbrellas relaxing and waiting for you to buy. The mass marketers also get into the game. Boats and small planes fly by with banners promoting one big idea like we always talk about on the show, usually a discounted price for a meal or nightclub specials. Talk about appropriate messaging and ad placement. Boardwalk merchants use big and small contrast in their signage and product displays. Volume discounts and packaging make vacationers rationalize their purchases away. Hey, for that price to get all that, I can't go wrong. The sights, the sounds, the sales, a marketing guy's dream. You gotta have it. The No BS Show is brought to you by Audible.com. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/NoBS. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. Our guest today is Ed Piskor. And Ed, I don't even know how to give you a proper intro. He is a writer, designer, creative, artist, sketch, hip-hop historian. I found out about Ed because being a former DJ, you never quit being a DJ, and I'm a music aficionado, and I stumbled across the Hip Hop Family Tree Volume 1. I immediately bought it. It is a bastard-sized comic book. I guess it's 11 by 17. You can get in all the details. That has a thick cover, but then the comic book paper has a feel to it like old comic books. And my brother Mike and I used to collect comic books when we were kids. I remember trying to buy old Silver Surfers and old Spider-Mans, and the ones in the 60s from way before when we were collecting had this same kind of paper that Ed uses for his books. He now has Hip Hop Family Tree Volume 2 and Volume 3, and Volume 4 is soon to come out. He's also written other books, one called WYSIWYG. We're going to get into all of that. Ed Piskor, welcome to the show.
Pleasure being here.
Ed, let's start by having you walk us through your educational background and kind of your career journey. What got you to this point? Where did this all come from? It's an amazing amount of creativity.
I'm from not too far from here, right? I'm from Homestead, Pennsylvania. In the 1990s, there were a lot of gangs in the area. You know, this is post-LA riots, and I always talk about, the second those satellite feeds were pumped, to the East Coast with, Rodney King and Reginald Denny, and we saw Crips and Bloods, like those gangs popped up almost overnight. And I didn't get that memo, right? So we lived in a Crip neighborhood when Michael Jordan was a superhero to everybody, so I would be wearing red, but I'm in a blue neighborhood, and I found out the hard way by getting beat up a bunch of times that I'm in the wrong neighborhood for those kind of colors. So I stayed indoors, man, and drew all day, and that was the bulk of my early education. My parents put me in little programs here and there to kind of learn art as a teenager and like a tween, but pretty much largely self-taught. Been obsessed with comics forever. I don't remember a time before having comics. I don't remember a time before hip hop. I grew up in those environments, and this project is like a project that only I could do when it comes to like comics and cartooning. Like no other cartoonist could do this kind of book. So I kind of hold the monopoly on this idea, and that's when you should kind of execute your ideas in the comic book space, because it takes so freaking long to put these things together that you need to choose the right projects, because we have a finite amount of books in us. So it's like I have to choose the right ones to make sure that I could live the kind of life I want to live. I have certain ideas of what success is for me, and one of these ideas is that I have to sell enough volume to which the royalties will keep me sustainable. And this Hip Hop Family Tree, I felt like it was a kind of hit idea from the start, and I started to kind of dole out the comics in 2 pages per week on a website called boingboing.net, and I instantaneously knew that I had a hit on my hands. Like it felt like a hit when I was putting it together. When I put it online, for all intents and purposes, it went quote unquote viral, and that was the beginning of the journey.
I have so many questions. So I guess the first starts with why it was so compelling to me is coming up in that era. And so I was a little kid whenever Grandmaster Flash and The Message came out. And then I was an actual DJ myself from my teens through my 20s when the 80s and the 90s hit. So I see this book and I say, wow. And I had known a lot of the history. So I'm reading it and I was like, this is spot on, because I remember that happening. I remember reading about that in magazines back then. How did you research that history and nail it so much that it's accepted?
Yeah, like we could use the word research, but truthfully, it's just reading for pleasure. Comics is a medium that rewards obsessive compulsive behavior, and we indulge in that as cartoonists, and you can't turn that off. I'm a fan of hip hop. I have a lot of outside interests besides comics, but I can't turn off those compulsive tendencies. And I like that you brought up Grandmaster Flash, the Message song, because that was something that kind of gave me a lot of curiosity when I saw that video when I was younger, because it's Grandmaster Flash and the Furious Five, and in the video you see 7 guys.
Yes.
So I'm like, who the heck is that other guy? And with these kind of questions that would pop into my mind over the years of like watching rap music videos or hearing weird guest spots on different rap records, or hearing older rap records sampled on like newer records, all these questions kind of popped into my head. And I would just kind of, in an archaeological sort of way, just dig deep to try to figure out those answers as a fan, as a nerd. But I can't sit still, and I'm in a privileged position to not have to work a 9-to-5 job. But many of my friends do, and I feel a little guilty about that. So I have to keep productive. So if I indulge in reading every interview with every rapper that I like, and if I watch every documentary, read every book, if a comic book comes out of all of that stuff, then you can't call me unproductive. You can't call me a slacker. So that's kind of where this thing was born from.
Share a lot of the similarities there with you, Ed, because I say every day, while it's still a challenge and while I still complain because I'm a complainer, I truly love what I do. And I talk to friends, and over the years, I'll just get an idea, like the Sights and Sounds of Marketing came up, and it was one of the things with you. I have a passion for music. I wanted to turn lyrics into applying with leadership and messaging. So we share some of that. The Message video, a couple quick things. The lip syncing's horrible on that.
Awful. So terrible. And in fact, a lot of the words that are said are lip synced by Melly Mel, but the words are from, it's a different guy. So
Yes.
it's like, if you know Melly Mel, you know his face, you know
Yes.
what his lyrics really sound like, what his voice sounds like. When you see these like fake words and this fake voice come out of his mouth, it's very disconnecting.
And you tell that story in volume 1. The video itself is grainy, but it's actually, there's a lot of real stuff in that video, which I think is why it still has such a long lasting time. One of the things I wanted to ask is, when you do this, what are the legal obligations you have, since you're drawing people that are real and you're telling that story?
I'll be 100% honest. When I started out making this project, just as a man, I sort of operate like it's easier to apologize than to ask permission.
Yes.
So I just started making this comic, and I didn't know if what I was doing was completely illegal, but I just didn't worry about those distractions. When Boing Boing, that site I mentioned, decided to publish the stuff online, they seem savvy enough, and they have way more to lose than I did. Like I was staying at my mom's house when I started this thing. I would, throughout my 20s, I would just like strike out on my own and then like fail and kind of end up back in mom's like a walk-in closet. And throughout my 20s, I did that until I got my footing. But Boing Boing certainly had a lot more to lose than I did. So when they decided to start putting it online, I'm like, okay, well, maybe what I'm doing is above board. And then when all the publishers started contacting me, I'm like, okay, well, maybe what I'm doing is totally fine. And I just kind of put those thoughts out of my mind. And to this day, like I didn't have like a lawyer like tell me like what I'm doing or whatever. But from what I understand, it falls under the bracket of like a journalistic, piece.
Okay.
I sort of follow. When I started this thing, because I'm just like, I didn't go to university. I didn't do any of like the academia stuff that many authors have done to kind of gain the knowledge that they have. So like, where was I going with that? I had a point, but I sort of lost it. I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Yeah, it'll come to me.
Let me touch on a couple of things that'll possibly trigger the memory. So when you're writing this, they flow really well. So there's some writing talent there, because it's not just a historian, and we will have on the show notes pictures of all of these and the links of where to buy it.
Yeah, I remember where I was going with that. So early on, when I was putting this comic together, people would use the word journalist when they were talking about my work. They talking about me in conjunction with my work and saying that it was like a journalistic, piece of writing. And I really pushed against that, because there's a lot of pretentious behavior in this space, because now that these comics sell like as much as proper novels and stuff, like people are giving weird names to comics. And, I just call myself a cartoonist and I make comics. Like if it's good enough for Charles Schultz, the guy who did Peanuts, it's good enough for me. But when I researched, like, what does it mean to be a journalist? Like, what are the sort of journalistic codes of ethics? I abided by that when putting this together intuitively, just because I wanted to have an extremely comprehensive piece of work. So I cited multiple sources and I conducted a lot of interviews, and I wouldn't put anything in the comic that didn't have some artillery to back it up if people challenged it. And all of this stuff fell under the kind of journalistic code of ethics. So I'm like, okay, if you want to call me that, if you want to call me that, that's fine.
When we were talking in the pre-interview, you brought up a great point. If one rapper would come out and say, this is BS, this is not true, your credibility would be hurt. But here you're onto volume 4, and you haven't had one notable top rapper come out and say that page 12, that's just completely untrue.
Right. Yeah. Just this past weekend, in fact, I was on a panel in Charlotte, North Carolina, with DMC of Run DMC. And it was a really, really great conversation. I sat right next to the guy, and he would just go on these spiels. And then he would weave in his lyrics, his like most popular lyrics, whenever it would make sense. And when I was sitting there, I was kind of getting chills because it's like, first off, I'm getting Run's point of view. You know, DMC's sitting here and he's talking to the crowd and he's on the mic and he's reciting these classic lines. So I get to see what Run saw. Like, I'm seeing him do his thing and I see how the crowd responds to that. And I'm like, what the hell is going on here? You know what I mean? Like, this is completely wild. But yeah, you know, every now and again, somebody will get in touch with me and they'll be like, Ed, your thing is completely wrong, man. I'm like, oh no, what did I do? I would never wear Puma sneakers and like stuff like that. Like, so to them, it's like, nah, that was no good. Put me in some Pumas, man, some dusty Pumas.
I've got to believe it's the highest of honors to have you represent these artists. And I've got to believe that they have reached out to you in that regard.
You know, it's funny because you would think that if you literally made $1 billion, like you have $1 billion yourself, that you would be above that kind of flattery or vanity. But it's not true, man. I got a call from a billionaire, and
Dr. Dre.
I'm not going to say. I just ain't going to say. But like, my phone number is within a network of extremely famous rappers, and I don't look forward to it. Like, it doesn't get me up every day. But when I get a phone call from, you know, one of these rappers, or if it's like a number that I don't recognize. Or especially if it says no caller ID, because that's like a real LA thing, like this no caller ID thing will pop up, and you answer those, and my heart beats out of my chest when I see that more than when like I'm hanging out with like a pretty girl who I look forward to getting a call from or something. Like, it's like, I don't know who this could be, and it never disappoints.
So you don't let them go to voicemail.
No.
You
answer the no caller ID ones when you make a rap comic that has 500 people involved.
The No BS Marketing Podcast with Dave Mastovich is brought to you by Mass Solutions. Put our 3-step No BS process to work for you. Visit masssolutions.biz today to take your marketing to another level. It's all about bold solutions, no BS.
Ed, you told me, you told the audience how you started with the Boing Boing and did 2 pages, but then you said when you did volume 1, you had it done, and there was a tweet that led to a bunch of sales. Tell our audience about that.
Well, it was this growing series of tweets. Like, every single week, there would be a different rapper tweeting this stuff. Now, the most popular strip, by virtue of just getting signal boosted by way of social media, was a piece from Volume 4, the new book, where it was a story about how Ice Cube met Dr. Dre at like a backyard barbecue, and I just wake up one day and you have hundreds of notifications on Twitter and stuff like that, and Ice Cube got a hold of that. And what was great about that was he shared that strip with ownership. So it wasn't check out this strip that this white boy from Pittsburgh did about me meeting Dr. Dre. He's like, yo, read about me meeting Dr. Dre. And when you get things like that, when they take ownership, it creates a legitimacy that, and hip hop is all about authenticity. So like whenever that happens, I'll just go to Amazon and see how my numbers are doing just on that little ranking thing. And it always boosts sales.
What'd you think of the NWA Straight Outta Compton movie?
I absolutely loved it and adored it. But see, my problem is, and I was thinking about this yesterday, talking with some friends, a skill that I do not have is separating my love for the subject matter of these kinds of flicks with the quality of the movie. So I loved it. Maybe it's a crappy movie, but I don't know. Like, and I actually don't care, like, because I liked it a lot. And I would have liked for that thing to have been 5 hours long.
Same thing. Yeah. Suzanne's laughing. I said that very statement to a buddy of mine. He said, "Is it any good?" I said, "To me, it was good." So yeah. I can't be objective on it. I just love music so much, and that's kind of my era. So yeah.
One of the stories that I look forward to kind of discussing and learning more about is the story of that guy, the DOC, who was affiliated with NWA, and they touched on it a very little bit. But what's interesting, like this is a story of hubris and flying too close to the sun with wings made of wax, because he wrote many of the lyrics for NWA, really incredible lyrics. They put out his own album called No One Can Do It Better, and which is a Source magazine 5 mics winner, like all that sort of stuff. It's held in very high esteem. The week the record came out, he drunkenly wrecked his Maserati, flew through the windshield, had his teeth embedded into a tree trunk, and slid his vocal cords to where he can't rap anymore. Like his voice doesn't work. And it kind of he destroyed his career. That the week his career was on the upswing in a major way, and that's worth discussing and talking about. And there's a lot of stuff to that that is just compelling story stuff.
The books are Hip Hop Family Tree Volume 1, 2, 3, 4 is now going to be out here in August. Let's just walk through them real quick. So Hip Hop Family Tree Volume 1 has Grandmaster Flash on the cover. What's the most memorable thing you can tell us about when you were doing that one?
Oh, geez. Well, in terms of discovery, one thing that kind of illuminated a lot of things for me was that very early on, before hip-hop really even got started, it was almost like hip-hop was going to go away, because the idea was to kind of invade the New York City, Manhattan nightclubs. And one thing I learned was just how the New York City, Manhattan elitist arts movement was so incredibly important for the proliferation and growth of hip-hop culture, because it took it away from the scary Bronx, brought it down to a more palatable environment where the media could kind of just come down from their ivory tower, see these guys perform at a gallery, and then write about it. They didn't have to go off uptown or whatever. So just getting involved with the impresarios of that era, Fab Five Freddy,
Debbie Harry is mentioned in that book.
Yeah, sure. And Chris Stein from Blondie was a proponent of my comic. He would share strips a lot. This guy Charlie Ahern, who made the movie Wild Style,
yes.
The main hip hop impresarios from that era, they all sort of got on board, and it was perfect, because at that era they're the most important people to kind of grow the culture.
To the audience, you have to check these out, because the reads are so much easier and almost funny the whole time you're reading it, because it's all in comic book form. So we go into Hip Hop Family Tree Volume 2. Africa Bambaataa on the cover was, I won't say forgotten, because purists liked him, but Jay-Z brings him back by mentioning him in one of the biggest hits he had. But Africa Bambaataa makes the cover of Hip Hop Family Tree Volume 2. What are your memories of putting that one together?
Let me think.
And why did you select him? The covers, Grandmaster Flash makes complete sense, and I love Africa Bambaataa. What made you pick him for that cover?
Each of these books has a different arc to it, and the arc to the second volume was that it's an era of hip hop. It's from 1981 to 1983, and it's an era of hip hop where the performers could quite literally live across the hallway from the people who would pay to come see them perform that night. So they had to separate themselves from the crowd, and they would do that in these real opulent ways. They would wear, Native American headdresses and Viking helmets that were from the Wagner Broadway operas or whatever. And then the arc of the story is it goes from that to Run DMC taking it back to the streets with Kangol hats and Adidas gear. So the guy that you could point to who kind of looked the most out there was Africa Bambaataa, and he had his biggest hit was in that era, the Planet Rock song. So it made sense. It's you put Flash on.
Played that a lot.
Yeah, you put Flash on the first one because of his innovation on DJing records, and then you put Bam on the second because he had probably the biggest hit of that era.
Mm-hmm. And he also, what I really liked about the story you told in the book is how he went beyond just himself and music, and how he was trying to really almost have like a movement.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, have you been paying attention to the news lately with the stuff? Because you know, when the second book goes into reprints, like I'm putting somebody else on the cover, just because of that. Because you know these things about molestation that are coming out in the news are incredibly troubling, and uh, like I don't catastrophize things generally, but at worst, if this is true about him, then it could be beyond Jerry Sandusky, because the guy, if it's true, which I have no idea, um, he helped create a movement that kept them around young boys,
Mm.
you know?
Mm-hmm.
So I just, yeah, yeah.
That's Ed Piskor, the author of Hip Hop Family Tree Volumes 1, 2, 3, and 4. I'm Dave Mastovich. It's the No BS Marketing Show. Let's go into Volume 3 real quick. We'll save Volume 4 for the second half of the show. You got Run DMC on the cover of Volume 3.
Yeah, that's a fun era, because we're starting to get into the records that like everybody knows. We're starting to get into the performers that everybody knows. Like the first two books, the people portrayed are probably not your favorite rappers, but they are the people who inspired your favorite rap. They're like your favorite rappers' favorite rappers, and they created the foundation. And the interesting thing is that these people, they sold in the hundreds of thousands of records. They had gold records, but the multitude of people just in New York City created a market for that to happen. Like those 500,000 records that sold barely got beyond the tri-state area. You see what I'm saying? Like
Yes.
like it stayed in New York City for the most part. So until things like MTV and like YouTube, where you could get MP3s of stuff or whatever, and you could hear the Funky 4+1, you probably didn't have access to those records. And so the cool thing about Volume 3 is like, and the feedback that I get from many readers is like, okay, we're getting into my era. Like you could not go to a birthday party at a roller skate rink in the 80s and not hear, Nucleus jam on it. And
That's what we were
stuff
talking
like
about.
that.
Suzanne and I were talking about it on the show. Or even that whole Houdini record. So I use a lot of basketball analogies with hip hop, and I would say that volumes 1 and 2 are about Tiny Archibald, Dr. J, and Pistol Pete Maravich, and then you start getting into Bird and Magic, and then you get into Jordan and so forth, because volumes 1 and 2 are really historic, and it's exactly as you described. They're people that if you were really into music, you knew a little bit about and heard a little bit, but still didn't hear it on a regular basis. And the average person probably doesn't really know Africa Bambaataa other than maybe Jay-Z mentioning it in New York or whatever. But so that's Ed Piskor. Ed, who are your mentors and how have they impacted you?
I have people in my life. Like I had a really great art teacher in just middle school. Miss Catone was her name. Is her name. I say was just because she got married and has a different name that I don't know how to pronounce quite right. But I love this lady a lot. And when I do things in the tri-state area, like give a little talk or a presentation or have a book signing, she's there. And what was great about it really was that she just gave me space, like to use maybe a basketball sort of, or like a sports type analogy, is like she recognized my like aptitude for my craft and just let me go, in the same way that like, a coach who has some experience with some players, like when they recognize an aptitude, they just have to kind of boost that kid a lot. And so she gave me that space, but really it was more circumstantial, just environment that is my inspiration, man, because I really came from some from extreme spaces, and I just never want to go back to that. Like like every day I think about it and just realize I have to keep working hard to just not go back. And I went to art school for 1 year after high school, and it was for comics. It's called the Joe Kubert School of Comic Art or something like that. They would be advertised in comic book stuff in like the 80s or something. And that was like my goal for my whole life, like to get to be good enough. And my parents didn't say like, go to real university or something, because it essentially was like kind of a trade school, and I only went for 1 year. But the value that had for me was to be in kind of the student housing with 30 other guys who had the same goals, and we're all, that would be like the NCAA team, because we're all the best people from wherever we came from. And for me to be around these people and to see how hard they work, and I was the youngest guy, I had to destroy them all. I had to work an hour longer than everybody, be the guy to put the lights on in the morning, shut the lights out at night, to just have the potential to stay in the conversation with them, because I was not the best. But at this point now, it's no question. Like nobody in my year is doing anything cool, to be honest. I'm going to link this on my Facebook and they're going to hear it.
It's the No BS Marketing Show. Hear more of my interview with Ed Piskor on part 2